Guys, good morning. Okay, so in the last session, we started with the concepts of asynchronous programming, and the help of one diagram I have told you majorly what is the difference between synchronous and asynchronous programming. Let's now try to understand what are the different types of that and how we are going to make a use of them. So we would be going to learn all these 5 things, by the way: batch program, schedulable program, flex queues, future method, and queuable epics or queuable interfaces. So these are going to be the upcoming 5 topics, and all of them are the part of asynchronous programming. Now, let's first of all start with the batch program. All right. So, the first thing would be like, what is the purpose of a batch programming? Let's first of all would understand that. And then we will going to see how the syntax goes, how we can write down and everything. And there are a lot of discussion regarding the batch program. All right. So let's do this step by step. The very first thing, what should be the scenario on which we're going to write on the batch program? All right. See, I would make a little difference with few other things so that you would understand this. If you would go to this user interface, let's say if you go with the account object, and then you press this new button. So this user interface is going to get open when you would fill up the fields, records, and everything, and you hit this save button. So one record is going to be get created inside in this object. So I can say that with the user interface, we can create one record at a time, and that is what it has been written. So using a user interface, you could create one record at a time, and this is an inappropriate way if you wanted to create multiple records. If you wanted to create multiple records, then obviously this is not the proper way to do this. Why? Because in that case, for example, if you would require to create 10 records, then you have to repeat the process for next 10 times. So obviously, very obviously, like user interface is just to create single record at a time. But for the multiple records, there must be some another way. Yes, of course, there are. And then we have understand that inside in the Salesforce, there itself is something called as data import particularly, because with export, you can simply export, we can simply transfer what already is there inside the object. But we are talking in more perspective about like how data can be created. So if you would go to data management, right? If you would go in the setup, inside in the administrator, if you would go to data management, you're going to find data import wizard. Now using data import wizard, we can import the data from external sources. We can bring up some external data inside the Salesforce object. For that, there are certain requirements, what we already have understood. Like we, first of all, would require to create a CSV file, a comma separated value. That's another form of an Excel sheet. And that to be, if you are importing the data, although you can export from any object. See, you can export from any object, but when you're trying to import data, that means you're trying to bring some external data directly inside the Salesforce, then you can perform this. You can import the data only on these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 objects. That means you can bring the data inside account, contact, lead, solution, campaign, and custom object. I mean, these were the standard objects, and for every custom object, you can bring the data. That is again nothing. So when we import the data, when we try to bring the data from external source, and if you are using data import wizard for that, so there are few of the restrictions over there. Apart from the capacity, the capacity is 50,000 records per transaction. That means if you are bringing the data using data import wizard, you are transferring the data from an outside world Using a CSV file, if you are bringing that data inside the Salesforce and you are using data import wizard for that, the first thing is like how much capacity. The 50,000 records I can bring at a time. I can make a file that could contain 50,000 record and I can import. If it would contain more than 50,000, my import wizard is not going to run properly. It's going to give you the error. It will going to give you the error. So that was first point number one. I mean, that was actually the point of interest, but I wanted to explain you one more thing over here. And probably I already have explained this, but in the past. So, so when you are importing it with data import wizard, if I don't know, I have told you this or not, but please write down this. Please write down this. Please write down this as a question, as an assignment. Differences between data import and data loader. Differences between data import and data loader. You have to try to find out the differences between data import wizard and data loader. There are a few of the points like data import wizard is present inside in the org itself, right? How exactly I have navigated myself to over here. I go to this, right? I go to data management tab. Inside data management, we can find out data import wizard, right? So the first is point number one could be like data import wizard is present inside the org itself. But data loader is an on-premise tool. You literally would have to install that. That's an on-premise tool. You need to install this on your computer, on your laptop, on your machine. You need to install that. And again, there are few installation prerequisites as well. If you would remember that, I have told you that data loader in the background would require Java runtime environment. So you first of all would require to install that runtime environment, the JDK kits, Java Development Kit, JDK. So you first of all would require to install that. And after installation of Java runtime environment, you can only install that, right? So that was the first point. Now, second point, coming to second point. When we are using an import wizard, particularly to import something, to get something from outside world, and to store those data, those records inside the objects of Salesforce. If we are trying to transfer this to a custom object, you can simply transfer this for any custom object, although there is no restriction on that, right? You can transfer data inside any custom object, but considering to the standard object, by using data import wizard, we can bring the data inside account, contact, lead, solution, and campaign members. These are the only 5 standard objects which allows you to import data by using a data import wizard. But this does not happen with data loader. With the data loader, you can import inside any object, any standard, any custom. So that was an advantage with data loader. That was an advantage. The first advantage of using a data loader is we can merely import data inside any object of Salesforce. Any object means any standard, any custom. But for the same operation, if I would be using data import wizard, I have a restriction. Although I can insert data, I can import data inside any custom object. But if it is considered, if we wanted to do the same with the standard object, this is allowed on only 5 standard objects: account, contact, lead, solution, and campaign members. So that is one of the advantage with the data loader. The second is about capacity. Using data import, we can only import 50,000 records, but using a data loader, you can do it with the 50 million. So because 1 million is 10 lakh in our Indian numerical system, so that goes to 50 lakh records in per transaction. So the second advantage is about the capacity. The capacity is much bigger as compared to import wizard. All right. So these are the 2 important points between the difference between the data import and data loader. Please write those names. Please write these. Now let's go beyond that. See, when we learn data loader, we started feeling that 50 lakh is a very big capacity. And yes, it is. Indeed, it is. Of course, that 50 lakh, 5 million is a very big capacity. But in real time, real time, we don't use data loaders in most of the cases. In most of the cases. I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. So in most of the cases, whenever we wanted to perform the operations on a huge amount of record, whenever we wanted to perform the operation on a huge amount of record, we have a separate programming tool for that, and that is the batch programming. That is batch programming. So batch programming is capable to perform the operations, whatever the operation you wanted to perform. That could be any DML operation, by the way. It could be insert, update, delete, merge, whatever. Any operation, whatever you wanted to perform. Batch programming, using a batch program, it could be done up to 50 millions of record. 50 million, that goes to 5 crore. And that's an enormous capacity. That's an enormous capacity. This is a very big capacity, I'm telling you that. That's an enormous capacity. So now let's understand. In real time, whenever we wanted to perform any operation, it could be any operation on a bulk amount of record, we always construct a batch program. We always construct a batch program. So now coming to this fact, what is the use of a batch program? What is the use of a batch program? So batch program typically is always used to perform. Batch program is always used to perform a DML operation. What does it perform? It performs a DML operation, but on a huge amount of data. Batch program would always perform a DML operation. The use of a batch program is to perform a DML operation. See, now probably you could understand how we are growing. We have learned SQL queries. Whenever we wanted to fetch the data, we have done SQL query. Then we have learned DML as a separate topic. We learned DML. We also learned database class methods, which we can use as a replacement of DML, because there are few limitations with DMLs. We have studied those DMLs as well, those limitations as well. DML does not provide you partial processing. DMLs are atomic. DMLs maintain the transactions and everything. And now we are going beyond this. This is how to gradually, the training should be planned so that you would have, that these are first step, this is second step, this is third step. So whenever you wanted to perform the DML operation particularly, but then on a huge amount of data, if I wanted to insert a huge capacity of record, if I wanted to update, if I wanted to delete, undelete, then we would go with the batch program. Because batch program is the highest capacity inside in Apex programming. Using a batch program, you can literally process up to 50 millions of records. And that's a very enormous capacity. This is beyond your imagination. How much record this batch program could process. All right. So that is the biggest use of a batch program. That is the biggest use of a batch program. That's one part. That is one part. Now let me tell you one another thing. See, I have in so many cases I have created the batch programs. In so many of the cases, my whole I want to say in every case wherever I would perform a DML operation, in every cases on a real time, whenever I would perform a DML operation, I always prefer to write down a batch program. See, this is one example. This is one example. There are so many examples with me. Where I have created a batch program. So whenever I will perform any any DML operation, but in a real time. Because see, in the real time, we never know how much data an object is holding, how much data an object is holding. So I would not create a general class. I would always create a batch program. So understand from the real time, from the real project's point of view, when you would going to create a batch program, there could be, there could be two possible scenarios for that. There could be two possible scenarios for that. The first would be like, the first would be like, the first would be like whenever you, for example, uh, let me try to show you something. So whenever we have this understanding, that whatever DML we are trying to perform, whatever DML, insert, update, delete, जो कुछ भी आप perform कर रहे हो, that could be done on a huge amount of data. तब आपको बैच प्रोग्राम बनाना ही चाहिए. Otherwise, what would going to be happen would be like, ये restrictions आ जाएंगे आपके. Because a normal SQL query could only fetch 50,000 records, and a DML could be performed on 10,000. Only single, with using a DML statement, you can only process 10,000 records. But if you suspect that whatever execution you are trying to perform, that data could be beyond 10,000, then you should always go with a batch program. So the entire business logic should always be inside a batch program. So that is the first requirement. That is the first requirement. Whenever you are performing any DML operation, but you suspect that this DML is going to affect more than 10,000 records, then you always built up the logic inside batch program. ये रियल टाइम है, कोई नहीं बताएगा आपको, कोई भी नहीं बताएगा आपको, ये चीज कहीं नहीं मिलेगी आपको. डीएमएल का एक्सप्लेनेशन एक अलग बात है, बैच का एक्सप्लेनेशन अलग बात है, लेकिन वेयर एग्जैक्टली यू आर गोइंग टू यूज बैच प्रोग्राम, ये नहीं बताएगा कोई. हाँ, they could tell you, देखो बैच प्रोग्राम से you could process up to 50 million records. So whenever you have this requirement, a huge amount of data रहेगा, कहाँ रहेगा? So what we started thinking it like data loaders, कि जब भी हम लोग ना डेटा ट्रांसफर कर रहे हैं एक जगह से दूसरी जगह, वो भी है उसका, वो भी है. मतलब if you are transferring the record from one entity, one environment to another environment, and both could be Salesforce, both could be a different as well. ये भी काम किया है मैंने. लाइक आई वाज हैविंग रिक्वायरमेंट जहाँ पे मैंने ह्यूज अमाउंट ऑफ डेटा ट्रांसफर किया था, कभी AWS से, कभी एयर टेबल से, कभी ओरेकल के सीक्वल सर्वर से. सो दैट टाइम एज वेल, मैंने मतलब ये एनवायरनमेंट कुछ भी रहे, सोर्स कुड बी एनीथिंग, डेस्टिनेशन था सेल्सफोर्स, दिस वाज डेटा माइग्रेशन प्रोजेक्ट्स, तब भी मैंने बैच प्रोग्राम लिखा. सो यस, ऑफ कोर्स दैट इज वन ऑफ द रिक्वायरमेंट, कि जब मैं डेटा लेके आ रहा हूँ, व्हेन आई एम ट्राइंग टू ब्रिंग द डेटा फ्रॉम some external source, and we know that the data is beyond like 10,000, data is beyond 50,000, then we would write down the batch program. Yes, of course, that is. But even inside in the Salesforce, whenever you wanted to perform any DML operation and you suspect that the data is more than 10,000, then always create a batch program. Always build up your entire logic inside batch program, or या फिर flows. दो में से कोई है. if flow की अपनी कुछ limitations है guys, flows की अपनी कुछ limitations है. When your logic is entirely complicated, काफी complicated है, then there's only possible is to go with the coding. The flows वैसे तो काफी advanced है, but still there are certain restrictions. There are still certain limitations with the flows. So I try to construct flow as far as possible. I always try. Whenever I got any requirement, I first of all think with the flows. And there are so many flows which I have implemented. I mean, previously for them I used to write down the triggers. अभी triggers वाला part almost कम हो गया है मेरा. मतलब out of every 10, 7 or 8 I always constructed with the flows. There are only few things like 2 या 3 कुछ रहता है जो highly complicated है. उसके लिए फिर then I used to go with triggers. And same with the batch programs. DML अगर if I wanted to perform, In most of the cases, I go with the flows. अगर उसके भी ज्यादा अगर कोई complicated रहता है, then I used to construct with a bash program. So whenever we have a requirement to perform any DML operation, but you know that this DML would going to process a huge amount of record, don't construct a plain class for that. Always construct a bash program. Always construct a bash program for this. So these are some of, these are some of the situations where you can create the bash program. Go with ये पढ़ लो आप, आपके लिए है. Now let me take you directly to the syntax. So whenever we would be creating a bash program is what ultimately that's also a class. Like how you write down a class: public class, class name, public class, class name. Public is what? Is an access specifier. In terms of a bash program, that could be public, that could be global. दोनों चलते हैं. मतलब if your bash class is going to take something from beyond Salesforce, कहीं बाहर का डेटा प्रोसेस करने वाली है, तब आप उसे ग्लोबल कर लेना. और लाइक इन माय केस आई नो, बिकॉज ये जो अभी मैंने ये जो बैच प्रोग्राम जितने भी बना रखे हैं, आई नो कि ये जो ऑर्गेनाइजेशन के अंदर का ही डेटा उठाना है इसने, ठीक है. सो आई कैन कीप समटाइम दिस एज व्हाट, मैं इसको पब्लिक भी रख देता हूँ. टारगेट काउंट आई गेस यहाँ पे कुछ बाहर का डेटा होगा, दैट्स व्हाई आई हैव कीप इट ग्लोबल. अदरवाइज आई यूजुअली keep it public. If I know that this batch is going, whatever the data it is, it is manipulating, it is manipulating from the same organization. The data is coming. If the data is of the same organization, I can keep it public as well. But if I suspect data is coming from external resource as well, then we could keep it global. Anyways, so to make a class, एक normal class, उसको global या public करने से कुछ नहीं होता. That is just an access specifier. To make a class a batch class, you always have to add one interface called as database.batchable. These are called as decorators. So you have to decorate your class. See, when we do this, जैसे अपने घर में बर्थडे पार्टी होता है ना, तो आप ऐसे रिबन्स लगाते हो, आप ऐसे बलून्स लगाते हो. रोज अपने घरों में थोड़ी ना कोई लगाते हैं. There is some occasion we wanted to decorate this room, तो हम उसमें कुछ एडिशनल एंटिटीज लगा देते हैं, है ना. आप ऐसा रिबन का सजा देते हो, बर्थडे के नोट्स लिखते हो, बलून्स लगाते हो. व्हाट आर दिस आर डेकोरेटर्स दैट हाईलाइट, अरे यहाँ तो कुछ तो भी हो रहा है. In the same way, if you wanted a class to become a batch class, you have to decorate it. So what in terms of interfaces you have to decorate. So if this is a class, for example, जैसे मैंने एक क्लास बनाया जिसका नाम है टारगेट काउंट बैच. अब उसका एक्सेस स्पेसिफायर ग्लोबल रहे या पब्लिक रहे, उससे कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता. If I wanted this class to become a batch class, I have to decorate it. With an interface called as database.batchable. And how to decorate? There is a keyword for that: implements. So every batch program, if you wanted a class to become a batch class, you have to decorate it with an interface called as database.batchable. So when compiler would see this global class target count, which implements database.batchable, at that moment itself it would understand that this is a batch program. System.schedulable के आगे पढ़ने हुआ. That's a schedulable program. पढ़ेंगे वो छोड़ दो. So these are decorators. All these are decorators. Database.batchable, system.schedulable, system.queuable. These all are the decorators. जैसे एक highly decorated officer होता है ना, आर्मी का, नेवल का, फोर्स का, which is having a lot of star on his shoulder, बहुत सारे medals लगाता है. These all are. That's why he is called as highly decorated officer. This terms, जो word है ना decorator, ये आया है officers के ऊपर से. Is it a common terminology? कि अगर किसी ने बहुत सारे medals जीते, person of a force having a lot of achievement with him, he has Maybe he has won a lot of battles. He would, or maybe he was a part of a lot of important things, a lot of important missions. So they have this trend that they would give medals. They award the medals. If a person is holding a lot of medal, we say it's a highly decorated officer. So in the same way, if you wanted a class to become a batch class, you have to decorate it with an interface called database.batch. So we always write it down like this. और ये सब होने वाला है. I mean, in coming days, you would also going to write a class to create a batch class. So a class is called as batch if it would implement database.batch. A class becomes a batch class when it is decorated with database.batch. Otherwise, it's a simple class, a plain class. Right? Chalo. Now, every batch class always have three methods: start, execute, and finish. Every batch class always have three methods: start, execute, and finish. Start, execute, and finish. And this is a very common interview question. They would ask you to share your screen and write down the format of a batch program. They would ask you to share your screen and they would ask you to write down the format of a batch program. So what is that format? You would have to go with this all implementation steps. ये आपको पढ़ना पड़ेगा पूरा, ठीक है? ये आपको पूरा पढ़ना पड़ेगा. ये है वो. This is what I was asking. This is what I was asking. ये आपको पढ़ना है. Let me try to create this separately so that I could explain. If my question is write down the format of a batch program, I'll write it like this: format of batch class. What is the format of a batch class? Yes, batch class looks like this. सबसे पहले, if I would be constructing a class that could have global or public as an access specifier, depends on the logic. Depends on the logic. Then class name, my first batch class. So up to this is just a class, a normal class. This is just a normal class. If I wanted this class to become, if I wanted this class to become a batch class, I would decorate this. There's a keyword for that. Implements. Implements what? Implements what? Database dot batchable. So this is an interface by which you can make a class as a batch class. Now database.batchable, it would always require an parameter, and that parameter is always S object. That parameter is always S object. S object क्या है ये भी हम discuss करने वाले हैं. अभी I'm just writing about the formats. I'm just writing about the formats. ठीक है? Database.batchable. After that, like this is how you always write down class, right? This is always how you write down. Now this batch class have three separate function, three separate methods: start method, execute method, and finish method. Every batch program must have all these three methods: start method, execute method, and finish method. So we would first of all understand the structure of a batch program. I have a separate diagram for that. Tomorrow's session we're going to first discuss on that, and then we will come back over here and we're going to finish this up. So for now, you must understand few of the things. Like batch program can have global or public as an access specifier. It cannot have private. Protected का तो सवाल ही नहीं उठता. Protected is access specifier, although cannot be applied on the class level. Methods could be protected. वो एक अलग बात है. Method inside the class could be protected. Then to make this class as a batch class, We have to implement, we have to decorate this, we have to add an interface. What kind of interface? Database.batchable is that interface by which a class becomes a batch class. If you would attach this interface, then this class is termed to be, oh, it's a batch program. Otherwise, agar aap ye hata dete, so this is a normal class. So this should implements is a word to attach. It's a keyword that you're asking something else apart from this. So what we are asking for database.batchable facility over here. So this becomes now a batch class, and database.batchable always have a parameter, and that parameter usually is as object only. Then every batch class have three methods: start, execute, and finish. So we're going to understand what is the purpose of start method, execute method, and finish method. What are the return types of them? What are the parameters that we are going to write inside them? What is the return type of them? That everything we have to discuss. All right. So tomorrow in the next session, I would be starting with this structure of a bash program. I have a diagram for that. Well, I'm going to explain you from the same. And once that is completed, we'll come back to this. We'll come back to this and we would complete this. Right now, this is incomplete. This is incomplete. All right. So I guess this much is sufficient for today. Do you wanted to ask any question? Yes, anyone? Anyone wanted to ask any question? I hope you have started learning VF programming, one which already I have shared on your drive. I hope you guys already have started learning that. Any questions? All right, then. Thank you so much for joining.